Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Google Developers Live. My name is Arun Nagarajan and we're streaming here from New York City. We're today going to try an exciting new series called AppScript Crash Course, and the topic we're going to dive deep into today is Content Service. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at what Content Service can do, what it's all about. Before we're going to dive all into Content Service, one of the things I want to do is walk you through where does Content Service fit. So let's take a look at the slides a little bit here. So one of the things that we want to take a look at here in the slides is the sort of the high-level details of all the different execution methods of AppScript. See, as you can see, there are 7 different execution contexts for AppScript. Obviously, you can run it right from the script editor, custom functions in Spreadsheets, web apps, gadgets and sites, container extensions, time-driven triggers, container-specific triggers. These are things like on edit, on form submit, things like that. So quite a few different ways you can run these AppScript. The one that I've highlighted there is called web apps. So web apps, as you probably have already seen, you can do a lot of really interesting things with. You can actually accept requests, respond with the UI, and all sorts of good things like that. And what I've done here is actually taken web apps and blown it out into other ways you could output that. So with the web app, you can display a user interface, UI app, using the GUI builder and other things as well. This is sort of the declarative way of building, a programmatic way of building an application. Or HTML service, which allows you to bring your own HTML, JavaScript, and CSS and really build a much more bespoke UI that you want. What we're here to talk about today is Content Service. So this is sort of where Content Service really sits. It's a mode of output for web apps. So hopefully this slide kind of gives you a sense for where within the AppScript ecosystem Content Service fits in. So Content Service is a type of output for web apps. Okay? So what does Content Service look like? It's actually really simple. So within a couple of lines, you can build a very simple Content Service app. You can have it outputting a simple hello world. You can have it outputting various other text types like JSON, XML, Atom, and we'll take a look at a few other interesting examples today as well. You can accept requests through GET and POST. And it's got a very similar authentication model to an HTML service, so I should really say the same. You can deploy it as yourself. You can deploy it as the person accessing the application. You can have it be anonymous as well, which is great. So you can really build something pretty useful for a lot of different scenarios. And in essence, it really allows you to build an API on top of AppScript that exposes your Google data securely or other spreadsheet information that you may want to have available as an API. And we'll see some examples of how this all makes sense in a real world scenario. So let's just take a quick look at a very simple example. So I'm just going to go ahead, open up a script editor, go to script.google.com, start a blank project. And this should give a sense for how you build a very simple Content Service application. I'll just say function do get. I won't accept any parameters for now. And I'll just say Content Service dot create text output hello GDL, and that's it. Oh, I have to return it. Always forget that. So that's the code that when you call it from an external URL invocation, it'll return a simple piece of text. So let's just kind of roll it out. So let's just say GDL test, and so the same deployment mechanisms apply. So you have to go into, let me save it. You got to have a version specified, save a version, go under publish, deploy as web app. You have to pick the project version. In this case, I'm just going to execute for myself. I'm going to deploy, copy the code, and run it, and you'll see hello GDL. Okay? Very simple text response that allows you to just ensure that you're doing the right things as far as the deployment, the authentication, and make sure you're calling the right URL. So one thing to note is that the content that is responded from Content Service is not sanitized by Kaha or other tools that we use internally that HTML service goes through. So in order to make sure that it's still secure, what we do is redirect the service to a different domain, googleusercontent.com. So if you're using curl or other mechanisms, ensure that you're following redirects so that you're able to get at the content that you're trying to return, not just stuck in the original script.google.com/exec URLs. Okay? So just to kind of really illustrate that, if you go and look at the URL here is script.google.com/macros, and the whole URL that you're used to from HTML service and other different deployment mechanisms. The ultimate end URL ends in googleusercontent.com. Okay? So that's a very simple example. So let's go take a look at what's possible, what else is possible. So here are some other examples of some more sophisticated examples. So the first one, and we'll actually kind of see this in our documentation as well, is a very simple parse a existing XML feed and then replace it with some information that it may be tucked away, and create a new RSS feed and respond with that. So this may be a little hard to see here. So let me actually go and find it in our documentation site, which is exactly where I've pulled it up from. So here's our content service documentation site. So you can see that off the left navigation, you can pick serving content as the option. And I'll show you the exact example that we're talking about here. So a lot of you folks that are in the tech industry may be a big fan of XKCD like I am. And one of the cool things that they do is they tuck away some really interesting commentary and notes in the alt tag of an image, the actual comic. So in this example, what we're doing is we're taking an existing RSS feed, replacing the RSS feed with interesting data that we're able to parse out using a simple regular expression, and then return it as another RSS feed. So a simple processing pipeline that I think is interesting. Another example is the ability to return JSON data. So we'll kind of dive deep into these examples. So here you can see that it takes a request. Let me zoom in some more so you can see all the details. Here it's taken in a request object that contains two parameters, start and end, and it's actually going into the calendar app and finding to see if you have any meetings during that day. So a very simple free busy lookup type application here, so you can actually expose this to other folks, saying whether I am free between these days or not, between this time or not. And all it's returning is a true or false, so there's really not a lot of sensitive data being leaked. So you can actually make this available for an interesting third-party application, if that makes sense. Great, so let's go back and now let's talk about some of the other things that we're going to talk about. So what I want to do during this session is really walk you through a few different examples of what are some of these things that we can build. So the very first thing I'm going to show is an RSS example. So take something that is very day-to-day and expose that as an RSS, which allows you to display that in very different different places, like a Google site or Google Reader or other third-party tools that may accept RSS or Atom data. A JSON example, so you're able to take a spreadsheet, make that act like a database, and expose the data around it to a third-party application, a mobile application, or another application. We'll talk about JSonp briefly. So JSonp is the way you can have a third-party website that executes JavaScript on the client side within a browser access data from a third-party domain. The other option for this is CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. That is not something we support today, so JSonp is the way you will be accessing data between two different sites. And then we'll show some interesting examples around other MIME types that may make sense as well. So this will hopefully be interesting, where we download Vcard information about a contact. Okay, so those are the 4 demos that we will show, and we'll go through it fairly quickly. And after this session, I'll make sure all the code is available on my GitHub site as well. So let's take a look at the first example, RSS. Go back. So I've written the code for a lot of this already, so just to expedite our demos here. What I'll show here first is the RSS example. So what this is going to do is the do-get entry point is all it's going to do is evaluate a template and respond back with the content produced from that template. So one thing that might be curious here that's worthwhile noting is that we're using some of the capabilities of HTML service within content service. This is actually quite powerful. So HTML service has the templating capabilities. there's nothing about it that restricts it to just HTML. So you can actually use the templating capabilities with the angle bracket, force print, angle bracket question mark equals, and all these other variations within the content service output mode. And here's the actual template. So as you can see here, we have a very simple template. RSS is the sort of the starting tag, and then it has a channel within it. So anyone that's seen an RSS feed, actual raw RSS feed, they'll be able to see all these details. We have a title that's static, and then we have something that enumerates over all the different items that I may have in my response. So what are we enumerating over here? In this case, we're doing a Gmail app call to get all the inbox threads and enumerate over them. So this is interesting because what you could potentially do is, let's say you have a shared inbox for a help desk or for some sort of a team inbox or something along those lines. You can actually have that available within your organization in a gadget using RSS, using Google Sites. So let's just quickly take a look at this code, and then I'll show you what the end result of this might look like. So I'm going through all the threads, finding all the messages within those threads. Then in a single loop, I'm just finding the first message as for the subject, getting the body from the most recent email, getting an ID so that I can potentially link to it in the future, and then also a date so that that's useful for RSS readers. Okay, so these tags, you may be familiar with the HTML service. All it does is essentially allows us to intersperse server-side JavaScript within our content such that the template is executed with the dynamic data that it produces. And then you'll see these force print as well, or I should say just print, which instead of evaluating it and then trying to do something with that data, it just returns it as a literal after it's evaluated. So loop through all my threads and produce these for the X number of threads I may have. All right, so let's publish this. I may already have it published. I'll just copy the URL. So this is the URL of this. And for now, I'm just going to make this available anonymously. If you're running it within a Google Apps account, you can have it available to just your domain, which is, I think, a great way to deploy this as well. So what I'll do now is go to sites.google.com under my account, create a simple site, GDL. It'll ask me for this real quick, create the site. Google.site. You should put a number, that'll help. Okay, create a site. Cool, so what this allows us to do is essentially find a great way for me to deploy this RSS feed. Google Reader is another way you can have this available as well, but in this scenario, what I'm getting at is a way you can distribute this within your team internally. Go to more gadgets. Here's the gadget for RSS feed. Select it, paste my URL. So this is the exact URL that we deployed the endpoint onto. Hit OK, save, and there it is. So you could have an internal site to your team, or in this case, it's a public site where an email inbox is being read. So let me go back to my email. An email inbox is being read and displayed as a very simplistic RSS feed. So it's a great way to kind of have your, let's say you have an inbox for marketing news, you may have an inbox for support desk, things like that. You're able to actually have that surfaced up in an interesting manner in a site or other RSS gadgets that you may be using. So this is an example where AppScript allows you to deploy content, such as RSS, in a secure manner within your organization. Great. So now let's do something a little bit different. So let's actually dive into using, so in this case, it's not quite an API. It's really another deployment mechanism like HTML. It happens to be under ContentService. RSS is a type of XML protocol. So what we'll do now is actually pretend as if we have another application that is trying to access data from a spreadsheet or another internal mechanism like a contact database, something along those lines, where AppScript is great at getting at that data very quickly. A couple of lines of code, you're able to grab your spreadsheet data. A couple of lines of code, you're able to grab data from your address book and things like that, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to actually pretend as if we have a very simple inventory database. So, IT help desk is a simple scenario that I came up with here. Let's say that I am working at a small department and we have inventory of a few things, Chromebooks and MacBook Airs and Dell monitors. I've just made up a few SKUs and quantities and whatnot. And the goal is to expose this data in a nice API such that I could potentially consume it from, let's say, an iPhone application. Very similar capabilities apply to Android. You may have an App Engine application calling the same API from URL fetch on the server side. Anywhere where you can call JSON across a domain boundary, this is a great way to expose that. What I also have here, is a simple script which uses a lot of the templates that we provide today, which allows you to turn a row into an object. So I just kind of copied that exact template. So all these functions should look very familiar. Get rows data, get objects, normalize headers. This is exactly from the template that we specify, we provide. And what I've done is basically open the spreadsheet, get the range that I care for, get all the rows as an object, and then just output that in a very simple call with a MIME type of JSON. Okay, so we'll dissect this code in a little bit, but let's kind of see what's on the client side. So what we've done so far is an API, and we'll just take a look at what the API looks like. If I just copy this and paste it into a window, you'll see that it's just JSON. Okay, it's an array of objects, items within a larger array. Excuse me. So now let's go to the client side code. What I have here, I'm by no means a iOS developer, but just whip something quickly together. What I have here is a very simple application that has a table view. Hopefully that font is decent enough. All I have here is a simple table view, which is populated based on a URL call. It is parsed as a JSON object, and then I have a table cell for the X number of objects that are returned, and I'm just mapping the item name and the quantity into it. Okay, so let's run this. So this will fire up the simulator. Sitting over there, I think. Might take a second. There it goes. And there's the data, right? Very simple API. And I'm able to see all the objects I have, all the items I have in my inventory spreadsheet, and the current quantity. So let's do a quick test. So let me actually go into my spreadsheet, and I'll say, let me insert a new row. I'll say I got some speakers, 3 speakers, no color, and Scott owns those as well. And I'll also say 5 of my headphones have been given out, or only 5 of them are remaining. Okay, no need to save. It's all in the cloud. Great feature of AppScript or Spreadsheets. And I'm going to hit the refresh button, and you can see that this native application was able to grab that data very quickly and reflect that in a nice mobile-friendly UI. So you have the speakers that are now available, the headphones have been decremented. Very simple application, but if you can imagine, since it's a native application, you can have the offline cache enabled, you can have this available on an Android phone, and so on as well. And we'll talk about Android in a lot more detail in another GDL. So that's the idea here. So you're able to expose data within your spreadsheets as a JSON API, which makes it incredibly easy for other third-party applications to parse it and then stick it into a nice UI that is applicable to the front end. So this is what I was mentioning when I talked about exposing your data via an API and build that API with AppScript itself. Great. So one of the things that a lot of the seasoned web developers have probably already gathered is that you can't just call JSON APIs across domains. So this is something I mentioned briefly. So let's say you have a web app running within App Engine or some other hosting service. That domain will not be script.google.com. You cannot make cross-origin JSON calls using AJAX. There's a new protocol that's coming out called CORS, C-O-R-S, we're looking at it, and hopefully we'll have some more investigation that we'll do on that front and give you an update. But for now, the way you have that cross-communicate between those two different domains is a technology called Jsonp. Jsonp is basically JSON with padding. And the padding is basically the callback function that is executed on the client side when the response comes back. So that's the way you want to. That's the way you would use an API built on AppScript within a browser. So within a web UI, if you're building that. So let's go take a look at what that might look like. So I kept this one very simple. So let's say we have some data. In this case, the result is hello world. This could be an object. This could be data from your Gmail. This could be data from a Drive file, what have you. In this case, I kept it very simple and static. And what's interesting here, let me break this up a little bit. Copy this out. So say var content equal to this. Is we're not just returning the content directly. We're also taking in a prefix from the request and padding that response with that. So this parentheses essentially says, when this returns, treat this as JavaScript and execute it. So jQuery and a lot of other libraries know how to deal with this, and we'll show that in a second. And then once I've done this, once the content is decorated, I just return it as a JSON MIME type. Okay? So it's still JSON. There's no MIME type for JSONp. And just while I'm here, I'll also note that this MIME type class has a really nice autocomplete. So you can just say ContentService.MIME type, and it gives you all the different capabilities that you have. The default is text. We already showed how we can use RSS and JSON. For JSONp, you stick with JSON, and we'll show some other examples as well with text. Okay, great. So I will save this. I've already have a deployed version, so I'll just play with that. So in order to show this, I need to have a UI running on another domain. For sake of simplicity, I use a tool called Jsfiddle. A lot of you may have heard of this. Very simple tool. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And so all that allows you to do is paste in some HTML, see the preview, and you can inject it with JavaScript and CSS that you may want to bring in to really quickly test it. So what they do is when you hit save, it's actually running it off of their servers, and you're able to very quickly test your code without having to spin up a server to host this. And this is all available on any browser. So jsfiddle.net is a great tool. You don't even have to log in to test the basic stuff. So what I'm going to do, and you can see that I'm loading in jQuery here. And what I have is a very simple header called welcome, and I'm going to paste in some interesting JavaScript. And let me zoom in here. Zoom in on this side. I'll zoom in here. Okay, so all I have here is a jQuery function that says when the document is ready, go call this service. And in jQuery, the way you say it's a JSONp is this prefix equal to question mark. If your URL ends with a question mark, that's how you tell jQuery that it's a JSONp call, and just make that with the padding wrapper. And jQuery takes care of all that stuff. It actually makes up a unique padding server call, a padding method name, calls with that, and then also ensures that things are not cached inappropriately and all sorts of good stuff. And then you just say, you don't even have to describe a separate callback function. You can just say, OK, when it's back, just give me the data, and I'll go with it. So it actually unpacks the data such that it only gets the results and not the callback function. So what do I mean by that? So if you can see here, we're returning this sort of padding around it, and jQuery is really good at just getting the actual results. So let's actually run this, and you can see that I think because of the redirects, things get a little funky. It shows it twice. Might be a little issue with Jsfiddle, but you get the idea. You're able to very quickly grab data from Google Apps Script that's outputting JSONp and use it in your own web apps. Okay, so a great way to add a little bit more dynamicness, a little bit more interactiveness to your web apps using Google Apps Script. Great. So far we've talked about RSS. We've talked about JSON to use in a mobile app, JSONp to use in a web app. And we'll actually show one last thing around Vcards. Vcards are basically a protocol that allows you to export contacts that are friendly for address book applications. So an example is the one that comes with Mac OS, the Contacts application, gives you a really nice directory style look. Windows has something as well. Vcard is a really interesting export option for a lot of different directory and contact management tools. So what I've done is, what if we have a very simple, let me go back to and find this guy. Oh, there it is. OK, cool. So what I have is, in my inbox, I have a contact. I wasn't feeling creative, so I just added myself. So you can just see, I have one contact with my email address and a made-up phone number and whatnot. And in my example, what I'm going to do is grab a contact. Again, I'm going to do the evaluation of the template. But in this case, I'm going to bind that template with the contact object, get the final output, and then return it. But don't just return it. Make it available through a file, download as file method call, and give it a name. So it's actually a hidden gem within the API, which allows you to take any content you have and give it a content disposition header, which makes the browser say, OK, it's told me that it wants to be available in the file system, the host machine, rather than the browser trying to render it. It becomes a downloadable file, and the normal operating system invocation procedures kick in. So it's great. So it really allows you to do some pretty interesting things with things like CSVs and other interesting output formats that you can cook up pretty easily. Excuse me. So let's take a look at what a vCard looks like. If you just go to Wikipedia, a lot of good details on the protocol. It's actually pretty sparse as far as a protocol might go. It just says begin vCard, a bunch of name value pairs with something separated by double semicolons, and end vCard. So it's not like XML, it's not like JSON, it's its own little format, and it's something that I think has become standard over the years. Okay, so what I've done is basically copied something like that, and again, I've used the template mechanism. So I felt lazy and just kind of punched in the same property in a couple of different fields, but you can see that you can really populate a lot of different fields pretty easily. And again, this contact today, I'm just picking up one that is hard-coded. You can theoretically have something where an email address is passed in through the URL, and you're actually picking that up individually and making that available as a vCard. Okay, so I make this contact object that I read through the Google App Script code base available into the template. That's what this line does. That means I can do contact.full name here, and ultimately I'll get the output that I want. So let's take a look. So if I go to publish, deploy as web app, copy this guy, and just to kind of show you, there is just one Arun Nagarajan here. That's sort of the default one that Apple adds into the operating system. So I'm going to call this URL. There's no UI to this. Imagine this as a service invocation where you may pass in a parameter into it. In this case, I've just kept it really simple. I call it. Again, no UI is shown. Chrome shows me that there's something available that I should click on. Probably hard to see. It says contactcard.vcf. And that name, again, comes from what I specified here. I could have made this a bit more dynamic. I could have just used arunnagarajan.vcf. And going back here, if I click on this, again, Chrome doesn't do anything at that point. It says, you said it was a download as file call. So the Apple address book comes in. I add this contact, and there it is. All the different things came in. If I have some synchronization rules with it and on my mobile device, this will work seamlessly. So it really allows you to provide data that's sometimes locked in behind Google Apps, such as contacts and calendar entries. VCal is another popular format. So ContentService allows you to provide this sort of export facility when that makes sense for your application. So in this example, I just picked vCard because it was simple enough and it made sense on my laptop. But VCal is a really popular extension type or ICS is another one that Outlook uses, I think. So really very easy for you to kind of build your own little export and interaction mechanism to all these different applications using ContentService. So hope you found this interesting. We have I'll post all this code up on GitHub very soon, and hope to see a lot of interesting applications that you may be building with ContentService. Thank you very much.